Folks, it is episode 1 of season 6 for the terrific Every Other Thursday training videos. And you'll notice that I am by myself at the moment because George is off trekking the globe, going to different conferences, and he has had a busy schedule. So we've had a hard time connecting. But George wanted to share some of uh, his takeaways from the conferences that he's attended this summer. So we're going to switch over to George in just a moment, and you'll be able to hear all the highlights of his adventures this year. But first, welcome back, and I'm Christopher Brannon with the Coeur d'Alene Public Library and the Inland Share Library Group. You probably have noticed that I am not saying the other consortium anymore. We have gone through a huge transition, and I am still reeling in the cleanup after that migration, and that's part of why George and I are not together uh, at the same time on this video. But George wants to share several of his takeaways from his conferences. So I am going to hand over the remainder of this episode to George. So, George, take it away.
Hey everybody, my name is George Williams and I am the Next Search Catalog Coordinator at Northeast Kansas Library System in Lawrence, Kansas. And Christopher and I could not find a time when we could both record together online, and that's mostly my fault. And it's because of what I'm calling Koha Conference Adventures. So last year I went to AspenCon in Golden, Colorado, where it all got snowed out. It was a great conference. The snow actually, I think, helped fuel some camaraderie and overcoming adversity, because we were all, instead of in the venue that we had for the conference, we were all meeting together in the restaurant at the hotel. And we actually had a great time, and it was a good conference. But I thought, at the time, it was in March of 2024. And I thought, well, this is great. The AspenCon will just be a spring conference to offset by the koha-US conference that always happens in the fall. And so these things will be opposite, and it'll be easier on my schedule. And then a couple of months later, I got talked into going to MPLA, Mountain Plains Library Association Conference, in May of 2024 in Salt Lake City. And I was asked to do a talk about Koha at next year's MPLA conference. And I thought, well, here it is in May, next year's conference, that'll be in the spring too, right? And well, it turns out I was wrong on both counts. AspenCon is this week in Nashville, and MPLA moves from state to state every year because the MPLA conference is a part of the state conference for whichever state's turn it is to co-host MPLA with their own statewide conference. And for those of you who don't know, MPLA is Mountain Plains Library Association. And it includes 14 states, and if I try and name them all, I'm going to forget at least one, maybe two, maybe even three. But off the top of my head, there's Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma. I want to say Minnesota. and I'm only forgetting two. Oh, I know it's not Iowa. Might be Missouri. I'm close. Anyway, it's, the way Mountain Plains Library Association works is, last year's conference, Mountain Plains attached itself to the Utah conference. This year, it attached itself to the North Dakota, South Dakota conference. They always have a joint conference because there aren't enough people in North Dakota and South Dakota to have separate conferences to really justify that expense. So I figured Aspen spring, Mountain Plains spring, but it didn't work out like that at all. So the conferences that I have been to this fall have been first, there was, that's the subtitle of what I'm calling this, is I went to too many conferences this year. This one that's starting tomorrow will be number 4. So I went to koha-US in Providence, Rhode Island, September 2nd through the 5th. This is the 11th annual koha-US conference. One of the key takeaways from this conference for me, there were 3 great days of presentations. It was a really good conference. It was nice to see everybody. I did a workshop on very, very basic jQuery. Just a really good conference. The most memorable presentation was Marshall Breeding. He talked about, I put it on the slide, Koha, 25 years of progress in supporting libraries. It was all about the growth of Koha and how Koha has had such a positive impact on libraries throughout the world. Marshall estimates, based on his data that he collects, he counts in the neighborhood of 6,000 Koha installations in the world, 6,200 and something. But he estimates that it is probably much higher. The Koha community itself estimates the number is probably between 16 and 18,000. There's just no way to know. It's not like a proprietary system. The vendors know exactly how many systems they have running because somebody writes them a check every year for those systems. Anyway, great conference. The other really important thing about this conference was we had the first time ever that somebody has made it in person to 10 koha-US conferences, and that was Jason Robb from Southeast Kansas Library System. He's only missed one, and that was in McKinney, Texas. And thanks, COVID. So that was the 2nd through the 5th of September. And then I got a couple weeks off before I went to WolfCon in Kansas City. WolfCon, for those of you that don't know, it's the World Open Library Foundation Conference. And the reason that I went is because the Koha is working on creating what we're calling the Koha Charitable Trust, and it will be a nonprofit organized under the Open Library Foundation that will be able to accept money tax-free to help pay for the things that Koha needs. The DNS for the domain name for the Koha community website, that's paid for by a member of the community. And by creating this charitable trust, we will be able to raise funds to reimburse them for the amount of money they spend every year on paying for that. And for, somebody else does the web hosting, we'll be able to help them pay for that. And we will also be able to use the charitable foundation to raise money for the annual Koha conference. So one thing I would say about WolfCon, one of the reasons I went is because, the Koha community is this close to having a presence in the World Open, in the Open Library Foundation. The charitable trust is just this close to being set up and ready to go as an OLF member. And since I live this close to Kansas City, for me, this conference was a 45-minute drive every day. So it wasn't like I was, spending a week away from home. Um, but I figured since they're going to be that close, and next year it's going to be in Czechoslovakia. Last year it was in London. So this might be the only chance I ever have to go to the OLF without having to fly halfway across the world. But Jason Robb from Southeast Kansas Library System and I, we did a presentation on Koha since Koha is working on having a presence in the OLF. But most of the conference is centered around and focused on Folio. It's EBSCO's, it's an open source project that has a lot of backing from Folio. EBSCO does a lot of support for Folio. And it was really interesting finding out more about Folio. The libraries that are using Folio are mostly large academic libraries, so there were a lot of people there from academic libraries, which I don't get to see those people as much. So they have a different perspective on libraries, and it's really interesting to get that perspective. But it wasn't just Folio. There are other members of the Open Library Foundation too, including Open Rules for Cataloging, which I went to their presentation, and that was really interesting. They're working on creating basic, simple, plain language cataloging rules. And the core group that they feel needs this are smaller rural libraries where they have people cataloging that don't have a lot of professional cataloging training. It's like, I'm from rural Kansas, most of my libraries, I just described all of them except two of my libraries would fall into that rural library category. I think even the two big ones fall into that category. It's just they don't want to admit it. They think of themselves as cities, but really they're just big towns. So there were people from Open Rules for Cataloging. There's another group that supports MetaDB, is it MetaDB? Yes, I think it's MetaDB. But it's a third-party product that is used a lot in Folio libraries to help connect different parts of the database to each other for reporting. There was an interesting discussion about writing reports in Folio, where they have some of the exact same problems writing reports that we do. And there were other open source products talked about reshare. It was just an overall good conference. The three keynotes, every morning there was a keynote, and they were all really good. There were talks about how open source projects govern themselves, even when they don't think they're governing themselves. There were just really good presentations about open source in general. Honestly, though, the best presentation was Chris Cormack's talking about the spirit of the Koha community and the five core values that make up the Koha community, that make Koha great. It was as good of a presentation as any of the keynotes, and it could have easily been one of the keynotes. And based on some of the things that I heard some of the other people saying, talking about Folio and some of the other projects, I think that a lot of people could have benefited from what Chris was saying. Unfortunately, that presentation was not archived. I'm not sure why, but it's not available for viewing offline or after the fact. But it's definitely the kind of presentation that maybe we should see if we can get Chris to do at a koha-US conference next year, possibly. Really good. So that was 2 weeks ago. Last week, I went to the Mountain Plains Library Association MPLA, NDLA, SDLA, that's Mountain Plains, North Dakota, South Dakota. That conference was in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And this one had 4 major authors. My favorites of the authors that they talked to were R.L. Stine and Laura Numeroff. R.L. Stine, Laura Numeroff, the 2 other authors they talked to, Abby Jimenez, and I'm not going to remember the third one, cookbook author. Oh man, I should have that website up so I can answer that question. But anyway, they mostly answered questions from the audience that were submitted beforehand. It was done like an interview. Somebody sat on the stage with them and asked questions that they answered, and it was really interesting because the same questions came up with all 4 authors. What is your process for writing? What kinds of advice do you give other authors? And just hearing these 4 different authors and their different answers, because they were all different, their different answers to those questions was really, really interesting to hear somebody speak in the morning and say one thing, and then hear somebody speak in the afternoon and say something completely different. Just to hear the different processes that they go through to create their work, it was really great. So one of the other things that I drove up there with my coworker Robin, and we stopped at the Fargo Library in Fargo, North Dakota, and hung out with Ben Dauber from koha-US. And Ben gave us a really nice tour of the Fargo Library. It was great to see him and meet some of the other people at Fargo. But that was really good too. Well, let's see. And in the slide, I did get to hang out with George Seaman. If you're named George, you don't meet a lot of other people named George. It's not as common of a name as it was probably in the 20s. But I always like hanging out with George Seaman because somebody is always walking by saying, "Hey, George," and both of us turn and trying to figure out whether they're talking to me or talking to George. I could do that every day. It's just a great thing to hang out with George Seaman. So the reason that I'm recording this without Christopher is because I am here in Nashville, Tennessee. I don't know what you can see behind me in the Nashville skyline there, kind of pointed south towards Vanderbilt University from my hotel room. AspenCon starts tomorrow. It starts very early tomorrow. As soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to bed because I need to be there in 7 hours. But I'm really looking forward to AspenCon. It's not so much a Koha thing. There will be quite a few Koha people here. But we're going to talk about Aspen for a couple of days. So I can't tell you what the highlight is because I haven't done it yet. And then finally, so that's this week. In a couple of weeks, the first week of November or the second week of November, I'm not 100% sure, but I will be at the KLA conference in Manhattan. For that, I'll just be there for one day, and that's Manhattan, Kansas, not Manhattan, New York. Manhattan, Kansas is the home of K-State. And the conference is being held there this year, probably a lot of involvement from North Central Kansas Library System. One of the things that we always do, the Kansas Koha libraries always do, is we always have a group session called the Koha Users Group. And so I put in some slides. Let me show you Kansas libraries. So this is a map of the 322 public libraries in Kansas. Each one of those little black dots represents a Kansas public library. These, the little tornadoes are Central Kansas Library System. The little green library icons down in the center are CanShare. The little shark fins, that's Southeast Kansas Library System. The little kittens are North Central Kansas Library System. And the little red stars, those are my libraries in Northeast Kansas Library System. So, 322 public libraries in Kansas, 180 are koha libraries, and 142 are not koha libraries. So that's 55.9%. So the way I always think of that is, we're about halfway there. So when we do the KLA conference and we do our Kansas Koha Libraries meeting, that's one of the things I'll mention is that we're 55.9% of the way through with the state. So hopefully next time around, Christopher and I will be able to record a video together. And until then, I'll see you all later. And I'll turn it back to Christopher to close down the video.
Well, George, thank you very much for that overview of your conferences. Sounds like I missed a lot this year. It was very hard not being part of the koha-US conference this year, and man, you have been busy. Anyways, folks, thank you for joining us for another training video, and I hope that you find this information useful, helpful, and we are going to be back in another 2 weeks. Hopefully, George and I will be together, like he said, and we'll see what we can do to bring you some more great content. Until then, take care.